All right, we're back with Chapter 15, top of the 8th. Bismarck won 9 of the 10 games it played over the next 2 weeks. Satch continued to pitch brilliantly, and according to Nick's unofficial statistics, he now had a 26-2 record with 299 strikeouts and only 14 walks. Sometimes Nick would stare at the numbers and shake his head. It seemed impossible that any pitcher, even one as supernaturally gifted as Satch, could be so consistently dominant. People always talked about his trick pitches or the speed of his fastball, but Nick thought that the secret of his success was his control. When he wanted to hit the inside corner, he hit the inside corner. When he wanted to throw a high fastball, it was perfectly at the numbers. And he did it game after game after game without complaining and without losing his good stuff. Nick's life at home was also going relatively well, because his father seemed to be settling into coaching. At practice, he generally worked with the younger pitchers on the team, and during the games, he would pace the bench and stare at the opposing dugout, trying to crack their signals. About half the time, he would be successful, and the players learned to trust him when he warned them about pitch outs or trick plays. He was also familiar with most of the pitchers from the local teams, and before most games, he would be surrounded with Bismarck batters who wanted a scouting report. After a noontime game, he sat on Saturday, an 8-1 blowout of a traveling team from St. Cloud, Minnesota. Mr. Churchill gathered the team in the center of the diamond. "I have good news and better news," he said, half shouting to be heard over the clamor of the departing crowd. "The good news is that we've been invited to play in the National Baseball Congress. The better news is that the people who organized the tournament have agreed to pay us a bonus of $1,000 for every victory." The players stared at one another for a stunned moment and then broke into loud cheers. Mr. Churchill watched them, a satisfied smile on his face, and then waved his hands for silence. "We leave on Thursday," he said, when everyone was quiet. "Same travel plans as usual, and make sure you get some sleep. Boys, it's going to take 7 wins to take home that trophy." The teams cheered again as Mr. Churchill headed toward the office, and even Nick's father had a smile on his face. They were probably happy about the chance to win $1,000 per victory. But Nick mostly was excited that he was going to get to see Satch pitch against teams from all over the country. That was a prize worth more to him than any amount of money. By the time Nick finished his chores around the ballpark, the players were gone. As he walked out of the main gate, he was surprised to see Emma sitting on the curb, her glove resting next to her. "Hey," Nick said, "what are you still doing here?" "Waiting for you," she said. "My mom wants me to pick some stuff up from the store, and I need help getting it home." "Oh, okay," Nick said. They walked north along a wide street. Nick followed Emma's lead. He was still thinking about the tournament when she suddenly paused and pointed into a big park that stretched alongside of the road. "Aren't those your friends?" she asked. Nick followed her finger and suddenly realized that she was pointing at the youth baseball field, the place that had practically been his second home before he got sick. A team was taking infield practice, and as Nick focused on them, he realized that Emma was right. Tom was at shortstop and Nate was at first. "Aren't you going to say hello?" Emma asked. Nick shrugged. "I don't want to interrupt practice." Emma looked at him for a long moment and then turned and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Hey!" she shouted before Nick could stop her. "You need a pitcher?" The game paused as every head swung in their direction. Nick wanted to hide behind a tree or maybe strangle Emma. But it was too late, so he slowly walked toward the field, a dull feeling of dread in his stomach. Tom and Nate trotted in from their positions to meet him. "Are you really getting ready to pitch again?" Nate asked when he reached the fence. "I don't know," Nick said. "I saw him pitch the other day," Emma said. Nick's head swung around. She was standing right behind him. "He looked real good." "We still need another pitcher," Tom said. "We've got the best hitters in the league, but we give up too many runs." Nick stared out at the field. While he was trapped in his hospital bed, he had played hundreds of games here in his imagination, and every clump of dirt and kink of the fence felt familiar. A huge part of him craved the feeling of walking back onto the mound, the instant acceptance that would come from being on a team again. But "My doctor says I can't," Nick finally said. "Sorry." Nick turned and walked away before anyone could say anything. Emma hustled to catch him, but she was quiet as they continued toward the center of town. When the Five and Dime store was within sight, Nick glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. "You knew they were going to be at that park," he said. She shrugged. "Maybe." "Why?" "Because you can pitch," she said in a rush. "It doesn't matter what your dad thinks or whether your leg is perfect or anything else. You can pitch and you want to pitch, and you won't be happy until you try." Nick kept walking. It was silent. It was nice of her to care so much, but Nick also wished she would mind her own business. Nick knew he wasn't ready to play. Yeah, his leg felt a lot better, and he could throw off a mound without falling on his face. But what if a batter bunted? Would he be able to sprint forward and grab the ball? Could he run the bases? But those physical fears seemed minor compared to the big one, the feeling of pure terror that Nick got whenever he imagined standing on the mound with everyone watching him and waiting to see if he was a pitcher or a cripple. Nick had been known for one thing before he went to the hospital, being the best young pitcher in Bismarck. And it was petrifying to imagine stepping back onto the field before he really knew whether he was going to ruin that reputation. While Emma may have had an ulterior motive in asking Nick for help, she hadn't been lying about needing to pick up stuff from the store. Nick ended up walking home with a bag of flour over his shoulder as she lugged 2 small bags of potatoes. As they rounded the corner of her house, Emma suddenly stopped and pointed out a window. Nick peered inside and saw Emma's mother sitting at the kitchen table. A man was sitting across from her, his back to the window. And as Nick watched, the pair suddenly burst into laughter at some private joke. Something about the way the man threw his head back was oddly familiar. "Is that my father?" Nick asked, the words bursting from his mouth. But Emma had dropped the potatoes and was striding away across the yard. Nick leaned the bag of flour against the house and then hurried to catch her. They walked back to the bench behind the house, but instead of sitting, she turned on her heel and leaned against a tree. Nick's leg was stiff after the long walk, so he settled on the bench. "What's the matter?" he asked after a long silent moment. Emma stared at him, her face ghostly white in shadows. "You don't think it's weird?" "What's weird?" "Don't play dumb," she said. "First you and your dad come over for dinner, and now they're sitting in the kitchen having a cup of coffee?" Nick thought for a long moment. Yeah, it was weird to see his father laughing with Emma's mother, or anyone else. But life with his father had gotten easier over the past few weeks. He wasn't exactly a chatterbox, but it also didn't sound like he was angry every time he opened his mouth. And maybe Emma's mother had something to do with that, or maybe she didn't. But anyone who could make his father laugh was short of nothing of a miracle worker. "I want my dad to be happy," Nick eventually said. "Because maybe if he's happy, we'll get to stay in Bismarck. And maybe he won't be so mean." "Oh," Emma said. She looked at Nick, something sad in her eyes. And she then pushed herself away from the tree and came and sat next to him on the bench. Nick tensed as her head settled on his shoulder. They were quiet for a long moment. Nick could feel the warmth radiating from her forehead and smell a hint of soap. "Then I guess it's okay," she finally said. "But I don't want to be your sister, okay?" "Okay," Nick said. And with that, we will end.